Hi, I'm Kale, and I'm a preacher's daughter.
And I'm Eden, and I'm also a preacher's daughter.
And this is Gay Girls, Good God.
Christian content from a queer perspective.
And we are rocking with the soju this evening.
The shot with soju.
Soju was, I didn't know what this was until I went to South Korea.
Really?
And I don't know if you know this, but I went to South Korea.
You've never mentioned that before. Tell the children about South Korea.
Oh my God. So my sophomore year, you're going to just watch these leaves fall off me throughout it. And
I
that's
don't know
okay.
what your nakedness exposed.
Spoiler.
Exposed, not clickbait. My nakedness in the Garden of Eden.
Kale's naked is exposed live in the garden. So anyway, my fresh sophomore year of college in the year 2020,
Ooh.
I went to South Korea with my choir, and we sang at the Jeju, which is in South Korea.
Tell them what month.
In February 2020.
February 2020.
And we sang there at a national convention. We sang 2 protest pieces that were in response to communist regimes, which I have mixed feelings about. But it's basically like my choir director's like, what if we flipped off North Korea in our choir songs?
Wow, that's a revolutionary sentiment for a North American.
I know, right? He was like, healing the world with comedy. Yeah, I don't know what he was thinking. But anyway, we performed the pieces, and then we came back. We were the last flight to come out of South Korea to San Francisco. Keep in mind, the first person who came to the U.S. with COVID came in through San Francisco.
Oh, yes.
So, like, we were in the airport while all of that was happening.
Bitch, I knew about you before.
Boots
we
on the
even
ground,
met.
yeah.
We even met,
Because WDM posted that article about,
girl,
yeah.
Y'all were famous. I was sitting in little University of Southern Mississippi, like Starbucks coffee shop, and it was them in the middle of an NBA game being like, oh, these players can't do it because there's COVID. And at that moment is when everything was like, ooh, spring break is going to be 2 weeks now. Oh, everything is like
done.
It all happened.
It all
in that
happened.
one day.
Yes, I remember
and then
that
we
day.
Heard about y'all. And it was like they're letting these students come back from the Korea, and they're going to bring the disease.
So because South Korea handled it so well.
Girl, everyone handled it better than us.
Oh yeah, well Italy,
handle it.
except for Italy. Italy kind of said, well,
you assume in this scenario that Italy is a real country. So that's your first mistake, Bambino.
Your first mistake was considering Italians to be people.
Humans. Oh my God.
I'm just kidding.
Us being white Mississippians circa 1940.
Real.
Sister Kale, what is your prayer request say? Who are you praying
I'm
for?
praying for the bitches having prophetic dreams.
You better turn up.
They know who they are.
If you or a loved one are experiencing prophetic dreams of the future, call in.
We want to talk.
We want to talk about the future? We don't know. Thank you.
But anyway, I'm praying for those bitches. They know who they are.
They know who they are, and I know who they are too.
Don't look at me.
Okay.
No, but have you ever just been in the middle of something? And you're in the middle of the day doing something. You're like, this was last night.
Yes, that happens a lot to me. I try not to think about it too much because I know deja vu is like this weird phenomenon in which your brain is accessing a memory as it's being created, so it thinks that it's pulling something from the past. But also sometimes it just fully pulls the wool over my eyes, and I'm like, no, I swear I dreamt this before,
Mm-hmm,
and I'm like, I know that someone around that corner is gonna come.
But sometimes I remember the dream when I wake up, though.
Listen, it's like I know someone is gonna fall through the ceiling in a chicken costume any moment now, and they do.
And then they do.
So what is the truth, Diane?
Ladies, one day I'll tell you about my pink flamingo crisis, but that day is not today.
Girl.
But you'll know when it is.
The pink flamingo, codename Pink Flamingo, not John Waters related. I think I'm not actually praying for the bitches who eat Velveeta. We know what we're doing. We live the lifestyle that we choose.
It's a lifestyle.
Yeah, we make the bed we're going to lie down and die in it. I think that this week I am praying for... No, I'm not gonna pray for them. That's too messy.
What?
That's too messy.
Not a messy.
Oh my God! No, I'm not gonna.
Praying for ya.
I'm praying for you. No, this week I'm going to pray for anyone whose favorite artist, musical artist specifically, blew up on TikTok, and now you have to deal with the bitches. I know this makes me one of the most annoying people known to man, but genuinely, when you love an artist and you feel like you have this connection with their art and their music, and they aren't that big or whatever, and then everyone is suddenly into them, and you see people using the music and like not really getting it in the way that you feel like it needs to be appreciated.
And then,
it's so upsetting.
for the rest of your life, when anyone asks you, or anytime you would like repost a story of that person's music, like you having a really important meaning to them, and then someone who just knows that once, is like, oh my god, I love them.
Yeah, but bitch, or it's like, I hate this thing with trends in style and fashion, especially. I say dressed as a 85-year-old grandmother right now. But it's like when something that I really like comes into style, I know that means eventually it is going to go out of style. Mm-hmm. And so then people are going to be like, oh, that's so out of style, girl. That was in style like 3 years ago. I'm like, no, I just liked this from the beginning.
Before it was cool.
The
idea of hipsters coming back. So, Sister Eden. Sister Eden.
Yes.
What do you have in store for us today?
Yes. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about the Garden of Eden. Titty reveal.
That's right. I was naked the whole time.
Bitch. And in your nakedness, you feel shame, I'm sure. Ay, Dios mío.
Thumbnail.
Oh my god, that's so real. So today we're going to be talking about the Garden of Eden. There's so many different things we could talk about here. We could talk about, like, we could have a whole episode about the fall of man. We could have a whole episode about, like, the actual, like, what the Garden of Eden looked like or was according to
the first 3 episodes of Genesis, dense
text, a rich text,
a fountain overflowing with knowledge.
Ooh. We could also, like, do an episode about, like, John Milton, as ContraPoints once said, and the way he created our
Paradise
modern
Lost.
idea of like the Garden of Eden, all these things with Paradise Lost. But today we're specifically going to be talking about more generally and more broadly the concept of the Garden of Eden in Christian mythology and what it represents specifically in my and many people's readings as the birth of consciousness.
And if you didn't know, her name's Eden.
So, like, this, like, it has no personal relevance to me.
No, this episode was just one that she, like, was just like, what do I do? I'll do the Garden of Eden.
I just, like, decided, like, last minute, like, not that important. Today, I am dressed as the serpent. I don't know if you can see, but I have, like, this little scale motif, like, for the contour. Mm-hmm. I'm giving green fantasy.
And I'm naked.
My name's Kale, and my pronouns are naked.
Oh, we're taking our clothes off?
Oh, word? Oh, short? Just peel my skin off.
Nudists in the Garden of Eden being like, oh, I'm naked? Oh.
That's the kinky twist is, like, they see their nakedness, they're like...
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
So rather than dive into the specifics, we're going to talk about the concept. That means I'm not going to bore you with, like, direct readings from the Bible about the Garden of Eden. I'm just going to kind of give you my personal recounting of what the Garden of Eden is.
Because the Bible's boring.
The Bible's so boring, bitch. But also it's a rich text.
The analysis of the Bible is boring. The Bible itself,
the anal cyst. The anal cyst. The anal cyst.
I don't want to read the Bible. I want to read the Bible with some words beside it.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
In the margins, bitch.
I want to see the margins.
I want to see the margins. The margins.
The margins.
Okay, we need to... So yes, I would like to, for the woefully uninitiated... The Garden of Eden is the first anything. In the, like, creationist myth of Christianity, God created the heavens and the earth, blah, 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 blah. Basically, he created the paradise of the Garden of Eden out of nothing. After he had created all of the living things, he first, like, separated, like, the earth from the sea. He created light.
Well, actually, he first separated light from the dark. I'm going to have to stop you there.
Do you see what I have to deal with?
I'm pretty sure he said, "Let there be light."
So, actually, so he created light, and then he separated the earth from the sea. He created all these living things, and then we're all familiar with the idea of the Garden of Eden, this paradise where Adam and then later Eve resided before they eventually ate of the forbidden fruit after being tempted by the serpent and fell from God's grace, cast out of the Garden of Eden, forced into mortality and to forever like labor, blah 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 blah.
If you don't want to know what happens next, go check out our last episode.
Go check out our last episode. This is why I feel like this is a spiritual follow-up to the last episode.
It's a prequel.
Yeah, it's a prequel because we talked about how like the death of Abel, like by the hands of Cain, kind of represents like this shift to
From hunting and gathering to more agricultural based existence.
And I think that reading of this like socio-cultural reading of the myth, because it is a myth and that's how myths need to be understood and read, translates very well to the same reading of the Garden of Eden.
Right.
So, without further ado...
I'm so excited.
Oh my god. The first thing that I would like to talk about is just straightforwardly kind of related to last week. There is wide consensus that the Garden of Eden can, in many ways, as a myth, represent the death of the hunter-gatherer, like the foraging diet, and the switch to agriculture.
Right.
Specifically, one really good article I found from 2007 by Eugene Helton, titled "Eden Inverted: on the Wild Self and the Contraction of Consciousness." Ooh. Talks about how the myth of Eden develops the idea of the birth of consciousness following along the lines of the birth of agriculture, and how Eden is conceptualized as this paradise because specifically there's a focus on diet in this article. This is a rich and varied diet that is taken from the earth that provides unto its own versus the life that follows by creating agriculture and this restricted diet that is a life that surrounds work and labor. So
Ooh, yeah.
he, in his article, this is only a part of his article because he goes on to extrapolate ideas of the emergence of consciousness and like, you know, the mirror self or whatever from this, but he talks about how that one of the most important things about the Garden of Eden is the shift in diet, because like the shift in diet is representative of the shift in lifestyle, is representative of the shift in being. You know, you create this new like version of the self that needs to understand your relationship to the world around you as a laborer rather than just as a component of nature.
Yeah. Something that has to like exist alongside nature as a part of just being nature as a whole.
Yeah, very that. So like in your own experience, how we've talked a little bit about this before, but how do you feel that like not even just Christianity, but as humans, we deal with the fact that we are separate from the rest of nature?
I see. It has just meant very different things from the rest of my life, like different periods of my life. Because of course, like growing up Christian, like you're kind of taught to mean that like you were made in God's image, so therefore you are the closest thing to God that
Yes.
among any living thing. So it kind of creates this like, and I never really bought into this, but I was very aware of it just because I was a very highly sensitive person, and so I was like, I'm not cool with this whole like slaughtering of animals thing.
Period.
And so just like thinking that because we are made in God's image, we have the rights to anything. And like everything else on earth is beneath us because we are the apex predator of consciousness, I guess.
I'm the apex predator.
We watched Mean Girls, the musical,
bitch.
and we stared at Renee Rabb's boobs the whole
literally-
time.
Kayla and I got drunk and watched Mean Girls the musical and just stared at everyone's titties. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I know that this, when we're drunk, just turns into the Find Eden a Lesbian Girlfriend podcast. But sometimes I forget how gay I am until I'm watching.
Me too, bitch. I'm married to a man. I'm like, I forget. I see boobs and I'm like, whoa.
We don't need to talk about that. Kale's single. It's like boy bands. You got to be like, no one has a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And also we're straight. Like, very that.
But anyway, as I've gotten older, my relationship to Garden of Eden is I really thought about the fact that Adam named all of the animals, and to me that holds a lot of power. Because that means like, to me, whenever I like name something, it means that I intend on having a relationship with it.
Yes.
Like the only thing I've ever really named are my animals or my pets, like things that are close to me. And so once along my deconstruction, like when I was in my early stages of deconstruction, whenever I was still considering myself a Christian, I was like, oh, we're supposed to we're meant to exist like as a companion or like as a protector of all other living things.
Yes, and I also like to name something is to exert power over it.
That's true.
I forget the specific. Forget his name, but there was a Spanish humanist who once said language will forever be the consort of empire. And it's kind of like the idea that like by taking something and filing it under your own language and naming it, you are saying I am above it, and thus I get to decide what its name is. So there is a powerful component of language within the Garden of Eden.
I've never thought about that. See, I've always thought about naming something as being like I have a commonality with it.
Like one of the most fascinating things to me is that when like European settlers like came to the like North American continent and started like their violent colonial like settler mission, one of the things that they did is file all of the native flora and fauna under their like the binomial nomenclature like proper title of their scientific like name or whatever. It's like, no, these plants and these animals and these biomes, like these locations, they have names.
Now I'm never going to call my cat Benny again.
Who actually have connection to them or whatever. And it's like these people came in and said, no, this isn't a like whatever the indigenous word is. Like this is a oak tree or whatever, and then it became that, and so it's this system of dominance. But not to jump the gun and get into post-structuralism.
We can talk about
bitch
because the way that we all because we all have our own language.
I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I have a degree in English.
That's so true.
And
the way that we all were supposed to like just agree that we're gonna call this one thing this. Okay.
Girl, but not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but yeah. So I would basically like to say this is the generally like common reading of the Garden of Eden, as this myth represents the emergence of consciousness, which we'll get into more later, but also more importantly, it kind of represents the shift in like what makes humanity the modern idea of humanity, agriculture.
Yeah.
The Garden of Eden is representative emotionally and mythologically of the state that humanity existed in, wherein we just simply like we're part of nature. We could go and get berries and eat and like hunt and like whatever, just like other animals do.
Like anything was a part of us.
Exactly. There was no distinction and separation between humanity and nature like there is now. It's just because that would seem ridiculous. Like humanity is part of nature or whatever. It's just that it was granted the privilege of naming and language, which was very important at the time. But today I would like to go a little bit further than that, because I trust our audience and you to like be able to just hear that and be like, yes, especially based on last episode, like, yes, of course, that's what that represents.
Yeah.
Let's take it a little bit further. This Eden not only represents like the emergence of modern like not only human culture, but humanity as it is known today via agriculture, the change in diet, but the emergence of consciousness as we understand it and experience it today. So I would first and foremost, this is going to be a pretty lengthy quote, but I want to pull from this article titled Young in the Garden of Eden, A Myth of the Transformation of Consciousness by Arthur George. Now, this is a man who is infamous for ascribing almost all of human development to psychedelics. I am not one for that theory of the emergence of consciousness, but I do think he brings up a lot of very interesting points, especially by drawing on Jung's like psychology and analysis of the collective unconscious.
Oh yeah, I fucked that.
Yes, but bitch, very that. So I think one really cool quote from this article that I got was, as far as our psyche is concerned, our becoming aware of the world and the world coming into existence are one and the same. This process occurred not only when humans first developed ego consciousness, but also occurs in any young child's development, and in the life of adults, such as when we wake up in the morning from an unconscious state and order falls into place. Our unconscious has no sense of space or time and little sense of order. It is indeed chaotic and is experienced as such. Thus, the dawn of consciousness and our image of the creation of the world are parallel and related processes which throw up corresponding related symbols. The notion of primordial chaos is a natural projection of an archetypal image that helps make the unknown comprehensible. Your reaction?
That was I thought of a lot of things amongst that. I thought of like the idea of the universal like trend amongst like spirituality's relationship to the unconscious and the conscious self with the ego. And at the same time, I just thought about how literally I mean, a lot of modern language comes from like the Greek,
Yes.
and like the Latin, and in Greek mythology, literally before the creation of consciousness, there was chaos, and whoever, like, it was chaos was the first feminine energy, and then something else was the first masculine energy.
A lot of what this quote is taken after what he's talking about in the article, which is that in a lot of near-Western traditions of spirituality and religion, myths align themselves not with creation myths specifically do not hold the idea that something was created out of nothing, but rather that there was a chaos before and that order was created from it. And that you see that in all of these myths. Yeah. So that's where that comes from. And what he's drawing the parallel between here and that what he says like then kind of follows, we can see in the macrocosm, there's the microcosm, is that the individual human experience of gaining consciousness as you grow older or as you like come into like conscious experience, even like as you're waking up, etc., mirrors the emotional and like psychological truth of these myths. In that, like, it's like there's the creation myth is like there's chaos and then order is made out of it, and then it is defined like one by one, and then language like sorts it, and it's like that's how your brain develops.
The human life is a microcosm of the grander there's developmental stages in each like stage of life, in the same way there's developmental stages of each stage of like
creation.
Being.
Yes, exactly. And it's like these creation myths ring true, holds like steadfast throughout cultures and society, and like have such power because they reflect that fundamental human experience. And topical. And then he goes on to then say, having the knowledge of good and evil enables humans to discern and understand both external and internal psychic reality. This is a quote that is in reference to towards the end of the Garden of Eden myth. Eve is tempted by a serpent and then eats of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the one thing God forbid them to do, and then like quote unquote gains the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah. And so he then goes on to say, in particular, pairs of opposites, symbolized by the opposites of good and evil, but including others in the story, such as male and female, and God and humans. Therefore, Adam and Eve's acquisition of this knowledge constituted an enlightenment and transformation into a higher psychic level, that of full ego consciousness. Before that, they were mired in a lower psychic state dominated by the unconscious, that Eric Newman in 1954 famously called the Ouroboros, where all is one and there are no pairs of opposites. Yahweh's warning that Adam would quote-unquote die upon eating the fruit may well render this moment a kind of initiation scenario. With the old human dying and entering a new state of being, this transformation is what made humans responsible and accountable for their actions, especially before God. Truly capable of sin or of good and ready to act in the real world. That is when Adam and Eve exited the garden. In psychological terms, they were not driven from the garden, but grew up and walked out on their own. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'm gonna be using these very like large block quotes because I would like rephrase this in my own like fun way or whatever and communicate it to you. But I want to give these authors their due. When I was researching this, these like some of the authors I'm gonna be quoting did this better than I ever could. So I do want to give you these like quotes from them. Go read their articles. But also I do want to say like what we're talking about here, specifically like the ego consciousness being conceptualized in terms of the knowledge of good and evil, that particularly is always the node that resonated so deeply with me. Yeah. When discussing like the Garden of Eden, like I always, even before I got into like the academia of it all, when I was like a kid learning about this, what I understood the Garden of Eden like myth to mean was the acquisition of human morality and thus consciousness. Exactly. Like, because like what made us the fall quote unquote of man was knowing the difference between good and evil,
the ability to understand dialectics.
Bitch, exactly. That's what he's talking about, this binary opposition. It's like before there is everything is one, the Ouroboros, like it is all connected, it is all consuming one another. It is this like lifeless and deathless and thus lifeless state of oneness, you know, that is like consumed unto itself because there is no binary opposition. And then once you know the difference between good and evil, that creates a binary opposition that then like spreads outward and everything becomes a binary opposition.
Once you can make a difference between one thing, you can make a difference between everything.
Yes. And like as later, which I'm about to jump into with Lacan, like the first thing you can make the difference between is there is the other and there is me.
Yeah.
And then from there, everything grows of there is this and that. And the separation between those two is what is meaningful. And those meanings are what you learn. Mama, I've been telling
Topical
you.
in my life.
Topical in your life.
Everything is a label.
Mama,
literally.
this is church. I brought church to you today.
Amen.
Mama, let me lay hands on lay hands. So this brings me to the superstar of my life in general, which is Lacan. Lacanian psychoanalysis is it beats Freudian psychoanalysis into the dust. I know I like to be like Freud or whatever. If we're talking about what psychoanalysts I actually
Freud walked
respect,
so Lacan could run.
Lacan, bitch. And don't try to read Lacan shit. It's very difficult to read. If you want to like understand him, look up like Slavoj Žižek. He's stupid and annoying and funny, and he like like writes about and then does videos and debates or whatever in much more understandable terms. Anyway, all this to say, Lacan is probably most famous for his theorization of the stages of development, whereas Freud was like, there's the oral stage and
then
the
there's
anal stage, which I'm stuck in, I guess.
Learning about the anal stage in AP Euro was just like,
What? Learning about the anal stage when I was 13 was... Anyways. Oh.
So I'm should I say, I don't like it up the ass.
I like it perfectly up the ass. Anyways, all this to say, Lacan like developed this idea of the progress of the development of the self, like whatever. But the most important kind of stage in like his theory of development is called the mirror stage, which like is basically this is the moment in which an individual is able to identify the other, typically their mother, which this is a potential mother. The mother, which they are still like being weaned from, and like thus need and desire but can't have, or then
yes,
given
once they're no longer touch their mother, they are
a
a
need
self.
that they lack.
Yeah.
That once they understand, because before them they don't have a sense of self, they just exist as one with the mother. But then the moment, and don't even get me into the Lacanian psychoanalysis reading of Neon Genesis Evangelion. I won't even get into it, but bitch, it lines up perfectly. It lines up perfectly. I will have to do an episode on it, and it's topical because they use crosses in that TV
exactly.
show. Yes. But basically, it's like in that moment, it's called the mirror stage because this is also at the point when like other animals or whatever are able to recognize themselves in the mirror. Like you are able to recognize that there is a self. So it starts with the recognition of the other. This is a potential other. But it's like, oh, there is something other than me. And then that brings to, like, if there's something other than me, like, if there is an object, that means there must be a subject. And then that psychologically constitutes subjectivity for the first time. And then everything develops from there, bitch. Everything develops
all downhill from there.
It's all downhill from there.
That goddamn fish of the briefcase.
Yep. So, bitch, basically, like, Lacanian psychoanalysis, when we apply Lacanian psychoanalysis to a Jungian reading of the Christian myth of the... I am such a fucking... Anyways.
Loser.
So when we kind of take this lens to the myth of the Garden of Eden, what we're seeing is this narrative like structure, is this story, is this myth that is reflecting the moment in humanity's development and also in personal development where we suddenly become aware of this binary opposition of like Eve is crafted from Adam's rib. There's the other. Of like from there, Eve then like brings into the idea by eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and then giving it to Adam, the knowledge of good and evil. Then we have this like passage from like, first of all, there's recognition of the other and this of the self, and then there's recognition of this broader idea of higher order thinking, ego consciousness of right and wrong, good and bad, good and evil for you fucking Nietzschean freaks out there. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. I just spit everywhere.
Okay, when you look for that from that lens,
yeah.
the main character's Eve. She's the protagonist.
I'm so glad you said that.
Because she's the one who recognized the other between her and Adam.
I am so glad you said that.
She's the one who recognized.
Because my good friend Joseph Campbell...
Me?
My good friend Joseph Campbell, a.k.a. Kale... we always joke...
Mama?
Kale is Joseph Campbell. I am Lacan. Mama. I'm a materialist.
I'm an idealist.
Yes, Mama. Anyway.
That is the boom boom manic pixie.
That is the boom boom. Yes, very that. So we need to talk about. It's time we talk about misogyny. Oh, that got ya.
Who would have thought Gay Girls Good God would have ever gotten to misogyny?
Garden of Eden canceled.
That's crazy because like we're about to have like a little misogyny arc in this because we're about to do the 7 Deadly Sins later.
Oh
with
yeah,
with the patriarchy.
Status update. I hate women. Status update. Bitches, am I right?
Yes.
Wait, let me. Bitches, am I right? Anyways, Eve. There is a deep set misogyny in like the myth of the Garden of Eden that feels almost like misplaced at times.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like Eve was made from Adam's rib. Sure, okay. Like Adam was made from the dust of the ground and Eve was made from Adam's rib. Which, first of all, the cadence of that, there's something to that. Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. But also then Eve tempted Adam with the fruit, blah, 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 blah. All of this to say, there's a lot of misogyny steeped into this narrative, and then later on in like Paradise Lost, and then in all sorts of like theological texts that were available to the masses, there was a lot of blaming of Eve for the fall of man. There was this idea that like woman as an object was inherently corrupting
Because she inherently must tempt.
Exactly, she's a temptress, and she is responsible for the fall of man, and she is blah 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 blah, and that is why she is lesser than she is. Blah blah blah. It justified all of this misogyny. You can see it in all sorts of, even in like Chaucer writing in like his fucking narrative poems. You see these references to these texts and books that blame Eve for the fall of man, and that they use to justify beating their wives and shit. Terrible.
Yeah.
So like steeped in misogyny, cannot ignore that, and we shan't, because that misogyny also has broader meaning. So
Eve is very old covenant, whereas I would say like new covenant parallel is Mary Magdalene, which we'll talk about later in the series.
I have a very personal relationship with Eve. I was going to name myself Eve for like, I thought about it for a long time. I wanted to. That was the plan.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the first woman, like blah blah blah. I have this connection, like blah, like this all these gay personal feelings.
Let's just say it was gay.
It was gay, but then for reasons I'll get into later, I decided to go with Eden. But like, Eve is a very important figure to me.
She is the boom boom Vincent Van Gogh.
She's also,
For they could not love you.
she's mother.
She is.
She's the OG mother. This is a potential mother.
And she was the first one to like just have to accept the wrath of man and be like,
girl. Well,
okay, I guess
grin and
I guess
bear
it was
it.
my fault.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. So I'm about to read a very lengthy quote from Campbell and Moyer's book, The Power of Myth. This is a book between Joseph Campbell and then like Moyer's. It's basically, a lot of the sections are conversations between the two. This is going to be like a pretty hefty block quotation. Try and stick with it, and then we're going to talk about it at the end, because I couldn't leave any of this out. I tried, but it's too good.
No.
So this is from Campbell. The idea in the biblical tradition is that nature as we know it is corrupt. Sex in itself is corrupt, and the female as the epitome of sex is a corrupter. Why was the knowledge of good and evil forbidden to Adam and Eve? Without that knowledge, we'd all be a bunch of babies still Eden, without any participation in life. Woman brings life into the world. Eve is the mother of this temporal world. Formerly, you had a dreamtime paradise. There in the Garden of Eden, no time, no birth, no death, no life.
Okay.
Yes, bitch. Mama. Okay. This is a potential mother. So it's like, by eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, that was what made Eve the mother of humanity.
Yeah.
Not by giving birth to her first children. It was by choosing to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, Eve gave birth to humanity, human consciousness.
Yeah. Okay, so not to get like a little woo-woo on the pod, just mildly. But the idea that like consciousness took physical state in order to the only way you can purely understand love is to experience to experience pure goodness is to have the understanding that dialectical that opposite but also equal exists.
It only exists because the opposite is known,
and because you have to be able to be in a state where you're able to understand those differences.
Yes.
And understanding kind of that as the emergence of consciousness, having to have that experience of making that free will decision to experience both.
Yes, I think I need to, for the sake of this conversation and for the listener, we need to bring in the structuralist and maybe post-structuralist thought leader. I think Ferdinand de Saussure. Oh, Saussure. I don't know how to pronounce French words. Yeah.
What?
Ferdinand Saussure. But he basically pioneered the idea of difference, which was then furthered by post-structuralists as they questioned it. But he essentially pioneered this idea that the meaning of the sign is created via differentiation from the other.
Yes.
This is what we've been talking about, this binary opposition. There is no meaning without opposition.
Mm-hmm.
This dialectic, this binary opposition, whatever you want to call it. It's that things don't have meaning because one word, or in this case sign, because word is it could be word, it could be a symbol, it could be whatever.
Just meaning.
One sign does not directly correspond to one material reality.
Right.
That's not actually how it works. It's that signs derive their meaning based on their differentiation between other signs and their correspondence to the material world. Mm-hmm. So it's that's what we're having here.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. This brings me to the next very large quotation from Campbell in this book, which I think, I don't know, listening to this, reading this, I was just he fucking gets it. He gets it. He's one of the girls.
Campbell's one of the girls.
This is gonna blow your mind. This is gonna blow your mind as a bitch that grew up in the church. Let me pop your cork. Okay. Let me rip open the hymen of your mind.
You think my mind's a virgin? You think this mind hasn't been fucked before?
My mind is gaping.
You think my mind has been fucked before?
Third eye blind? No. Third eye gaping. Okay, so Campbell says, we have the Sumerian seals from as early as 3,500 BC, showing the serpent and the tree and the goddess, with the goddess giving the fruit of life to a visiting male. The old mythology of the goddess is right there. There is actually a historical explanation of the change of this image of the serpent and the snake in Genesis, based on the coming of the Hebrews into Canaan. The principal divinity of the people of Canaan was the goddess, and associated with the goddess is the serpent. This is the symbol of the mystery of life. The male god-oriented groups rejected it. In other words, there is a historical rejection of the mother goddess implied in the story of the Garden of Eden. And then Moyer says, it does seem that this story has done women a great disservice by casting Eve as responsible for the fall. Why? And Campbell says, they represent life. Man doesn't enter life except by woman. And so it is woman who brings us into this world of pairs of opposites and suffering. Male and female is one opposition. Another opposition is the human and God. Good and evil is a third opposition. The primary oppositions are the sexual and that between human beings and God. Then comes the idea of good and evil in the world. And so Adam and Eve have thrown themselves out of the garden of timeless unity, you might say, just by the act of recognizing duality. To move out into the world, you have to act in terms of pairs and opposites.
Okay. I have lots of thoughts and feelings.
So first of all, can I just say, Campbell tying together misogyny, difference, the historical context of the Sumerian mythology being invaded by what came to be Hebrew mythos. Fascinating.
We kind of had this conversation 2 nights ago and didn't even realize it.
I realized I have been researching this. Mama, I was leading a horse to water. One thing about me, when I'm talking to you, sometimes, one thing about the number of names I throw out when I'm talking to you, I'm like, well, Joseph Campbell once said or whatever. You have no idea the number of names I'm holding back. You have no idea the number of names I'm holding back.
You come into things, like, whenever we have, like, conversations, you'll come into things from a very, like, research point, and then I come with thoughts and vibes that I've been feeling, and they just happen to, like, be like, oh, we were thinking the same thing. Again,
Yes.
materialist, idealist.
Yes, it's because I feel like in a lot of ways, I think I admire you, and I feel like you're stronger than me for that, because I will have these nebulous, like, to bring it back to a place of chaos, like these chaotic, unknowable, like, anti-sublime experiences. I would call them feelings, but it's more like affectatious than that. And I have to seek out the knowledge and wisdom of those who came before me to put words to it and confirm
Nah,
it.
it's only me.
And explain
That
it.
we-
Yeah,
that we get
exactly.
it from.
Exactly. And I'm like, yes, that is what I was looking for. Thank you, like Derrida. Thank you, Baudrillard. Thank you, like Butler. Like, gender transition, even for me, was a profoundly intellectual experience. It was
That's
like
so you.
right? It was like
you.
I could not understand myself as non-binary until I understood the gender theory of like that explained to me like my point of existence as such, and I could not understand myself as a woman until like I read and understood like and worked through my internalized trans misogyny via gender theory. Whereas you are so comfortable and capable of like sitting in your emotions and experiences and painting them in such broad and like creative strokes, which is so admirable.
And then
it's also what makes us so complimentary.
And it leads to me being like, whenever we have conversation, I'm like, oh, someone already said that. You know what I mean?
You'll literally be like, I feel sad. And I'm like, well, Foucault once said. And I'm like,
Or I'll say something, you're like, literally someone already has that quote, just said a lot smarter.
well, see, I know it comes off that way, but that's because I'm trying to say, like, I felt like that too. Until I realized that in 1987, this bitch with a bald head said it.
Person.
Yes, and we don't have to suffer anymore because they already told us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Which again, language.
Language.
It's all about language.
When going back, did you say the Canaanites, the
Yes.
goddess they worship was Eve?
Yes.
That
Well,
that is so relevant
Yes.
to Do You Cry for Your Mother Too?
Yes, bitch. That's what I'm saying. The idea that
Like tied to the mother.
Yes.
Cannot escape your mother's blood.
the Garden of Eden, as we know it today, is a bastardization of the original like collection of myths, which positioned the creation and the development of consciousness and the garden or whatever as a place which was dominated. Campbell in this book talks about how the primary god of the garden was the serpent, who shed his skin, who recreated himself, who represented life and
evolution.
Evolution, yes, exactly, and the novelty and the beauty and the incomprehensibility of life itself, along with the goddess. I said Jesus, or not Jesus, but God walked in the garden, not because like it was his garden; he was a guest there. It was primarily the domain of the serpent and the goddess, both of whom represented life, Genesis, birth. Regeneration and birth itself through the woman. And then in a lot of these myths, like in these Sumerian seals, you have the man, the first man visiting like the garden, and then being gifted from the goddess and the serpent this beautiful gift of the knowledge of good and
It's
evil,
like,
or
yeah,
consciousness,
it's not a
or
curse.
life.
It's a curse and a gift.
Exactly, and it's something that you are given from a woman. And these bitches came in and said, "Oh no. You aren't given this from a woman goddess.
She cursed you with
She
it.
cursed you, and also she was made from your rib. Let's not get it twisted."
And see,
Shut the fuck up. First of all, I'm so pissed.
this
sometimes.
is so relevant.
We could have
Yeah.
like the fact that our entire society, culture, like epistemology, like everything we have is derived from patriarchy.
And you can literally see
because of this
historically
historical
you
line.
can see where it happens, where it's the word matriarchy is used, but it's really not like it's so funny because a matriarchy really is just equality.
And like,
it's balance.
dear listener, we will never, and you will never, unfortunately, ever understand what it would mean to exist in a matriarchy,
Yeah.
to exist in a world, in a culture, in a society, in a version of humanity that is not dominated in systems of power by men.
Mm-hmm.
As a trans woman, I have very complicated feelings about a total like gender and sex binary.
Yeah.
I do think, however, that like as a historical political class, like obviously we see in this convolution of the myth of the Garden of Eden, which is someone who like literally named herself after that myth. I also have complicated feelings about like men projecting and via power completely overriding this version of creation into something that positions the original creators, people who give birth, like those are the creators. That's God, bitch. Those are the goddesses. Into the corruptors. Like sex is not a source of birth and of new life and of knowledge and of good and evil and of consciousness. Sex is a source of corruption and evil and domination. And I think that I'm not obsessed with sex. I just can't stop thinking about it.
This is gonna tie in. So like the next week is gonna just be part 2 of this, but New Testament version.
Yes, exactly. And I think that I think to tie it together nicely, I would actually like to read an excerpt from my thesis.
Yellow and Brick Trees.
So we've talked a bit around about it, but I want to. It's not gonna. My thesis, ladies and gentlemen, and those who lie us betwixt. It's not good, first of all. But second of all, this is going to be taken out of context. But this is a short section where I talk about the story of when I decided on my name. I had basically decided, because all of my siblings growing up had biblical names, and I was the only one who didn't. I was like, you know what? This has always felt wrong. So of course I have to have a Bible name, right? Mm. And so I was in the middle of the park in the middle of the night, like in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, completely sober, just like walking around like a fucking freak, trying to figure this out for myself in this crisis or whatever. And anyway, this is where we drop down into this anecdote in my thesis. I absent-mindedly ran my hands through the bushes and low-hanging tree limbs as I walked, picking off a solitary leaf from a tiny, peculiar-looking tree. Looking down at the fan-shaped leaf between my thumb and forefinger, I was thrown deep into a childhood memory. Ginkgo trees, my father had told me years ago, the autumn sun filtering through the yellow firework limbs of the tree before us, are this ancient, ancient species. He was a pastor, yes, but he was also a middle school science teacher, and our shared love of random scientific factoids was one of our few points of connection. A point of connection that he, in his desperate attempts to show me the way of Christ, often saw as an opportunity to craft a creative sermon. See how the leaves and the way they grow on the limbs look kind of funny? That's because they're their whole own thing. They've been around since the beginning, before the flood. Might have even been in the Garden of Eden. He had handed me the leaf that he was holding up to the sun and told me to put it in my pocket. Press that in a book or something and save it. These trees are kind of like a reminder from God. He paused, the silence laden with expectation. A reminder of what? I asked, familiar with the convention of this one-to-one Sunday school lessons. Reminder of what comes before the fall. Eden. Perfect harmony with nature and God himself. These old trees are still in harmony with nature, just like they were in Eden. We've fallen, but one day we'll be reunited with God once more and live in perfect harmony and peace. Paradise again. I was crying. I was standing alone in a public park at roughly 3 a.m. on a Thursday, looking at a leaf in my hand while completely sober, crying. Deranged behavior, very gay, I know. I could almost see everything fall into place before me, each and every moment of who I was converging along the lines of that little leaf and narrowing into its stem, focusing back into my chest. I felt it. Waves and waves crashed over me, waves of something more than emotion. Meaning. Truth. My name was Eden. My name is Eden. This is the garden that I have made, the harmony that I was taught to seek in power beyond myself. A name meaning paradise, earthly delights, a life led in bliss. I was going to transition. I was going to find my bliss. I was going to become Eden.
Gay!
Gay as hell, bitch! Gay as hell.
No, but the idea that, like, hate to credit the man where he is. But the idea that one, like, the hope is just to exist to that, like, to where there was no difference.
Yes. Transcendentalism.
The absence of difference and label and negation.
I named myself Eden because I have been chasing the same ideal of ego death, of ego consciousness without self, of connection with nature and oneness, of transcendentalism via Walden, all of that stuff. And finding the same language and concepts and ideas and beliefs crop up in different philosophies and different ways and different writings and different people in my life and otherwise has been so, like, affirming and also, like, just emotional for me.
Yeah.
Because when I connect on that level of that specific component of who I am, because to me that is all of who I am, it's so important to me. When I see that in other people's eyes, it's like, yes, I'm Eden. That's me. That's what it is. Yes. And it makes me very happy.
Yeah, for sure. And, like, I think that part of the reason that myth exists is to give narrative to something or someone.
Just give me a reason, just a little bit enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, for real.
Because, like, I don't know, just the idea of myth is all is something that's meant to unify and that is meant to bring forth, like, a mutual understanding and a mutual, like, I don't know, security in a way, but just like it's meant to answer the why.
Yes, it's like the thing is the difference between a novel, let's say, you know, for instance, or like myth and folklore is usually what's kind of grouped together, is that there is no singular author of myths or of folklore. These are cultural narratives.
Everyone has a piece of it.
They're usually derived from oral tradition, and like they're usually thus like, if something survives and is consistently passed down through generations and like through a people, that's usually because it speaks to something that is deeply important.
Monomyth?
Or period. Or true or relevant to that culture or to the humanity, like, and human experience of those people itself. So when we see these creation myths throughout all of human culture, like centering around this idea of like something from nothing or something from chaos, of those two very basic things. That's like, those are kind of two simple ways of understanding like the emergence of like matter itself, like the material world, and also like these myths of the emergence of consciousness as being through binary opposition versus as through like personal identification. It's like these are myths that are speaking to something not only like deeply and fundamentally human, but they're not speaking to it. They are humanity. Like these are the stories and the traditions and the myths that make us, you know?
Yeah. And that's what I find so beautiful about myths, is because it completely encapsulates the idea of the collective as well as the individual, because you have the collective, you have the story, and then at the same time you have the individual, the vessel through which it is being like received from everyone else and being transported.
Which is just, this is a whole other tangent, but like the role of the storyteller.
We're two storytellers.
And we are storytellers. One thing about us, we are storytellers. It's like in a community, no matter how small or large, no matter how ancient or modern, the storyteller's role is to further cement the cultural values that they like of the past and to progress them into what they need and to translate them into the future. Yes, it's an act of translation.
Yes.
Don't even get me into translation, bitch, because translation, again, it's not a one-to-one thing. Just like it
evolves, like as like the nature of consciousness is, it evolves.
Yes, and sign's meaning is not derived from a one-to-one identification. Is defined through difference, and thus a translation from one system of signs to another system of signs, like from one language to another language, can never be a one-to-one like translation, like a direct, like this means this and this means the exact same thing. It's never that. Thus, translation is inherently a creative and thus ideological act. And so to translate something from one language to another, from one time to another, from one culture to another, is to take part of yourself, imbue it with that time, culture, narrative, language, and bring it to the people that you are trying to bring it to. And that's beautiful.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Oh, it's so beautiful. But you know what's even more beautiful?
What?
I'm sure the verse of the day that you have brought us.
So, today's verse today is a little non-conventional.
Okay.
We're going to be talking about the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which we are both obsessed with. We love Mary Magdalene for different reasons. Me, because I always was like, her and Jesus seem to be a little close.
A little close.
And you, because she was a sex worker. Lines 2 through 9.
I love how you thought you were just going to get away with being like, sex worker, right? First of all, Mary Magdalene episode incoming, and it will be me leading that discussion because, bitch.
But the episode we do on the 7 Deadly Sins is going to be closely related to her.
Oh,
just so you know, which is incoming.
Deeply. May I just say, sex work is the oldest profession and has been named so for a reason.
Because of humans' desire for intimacy.
Bitch.
And closeness.
Desire,
and oneness.
Oneness. The human desire and fear for oneness and the inherent greed and separation of availability that is derived from consciousness.
Which is this episode.
We getting Jungian up in the gig, bitch. Jungian.
First of all, fuck Young. Also, we get it.
Also, Lacan, hit me up.
All right. Anyway, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, page 10, verses 2 through 9. So Peter said to Mary, "Sister, we know that the teacher loved you differently from other women.
Ooh.
Tell us whatever any of the words he had told you that you remember, which we have not heard." And Mary said to them, "I will now speak to you of which that has not been given for you to hear." They were fucking.
They were fucking. Also, that's
even if they weren't fucking, there was such longing.
That's so, like, I know part of me is like, they weren't real, like, blah, blah, blah. But also just the idea of, imagine for a moment, dear listener, imagine you are a sex worker and you develop a close and intimate and spiritual relationship with the Son of God.
No, that's trauma bond.
Girl, speak on it, because I'm saying, like, they imagine having sex with
Son
Jesus,
of Man. Yeah,
with Jesus,
or not even sex, but just because of like the way that it's talked about here, which I think that this is just as valid as the Gospel according to Luke or
Yes,
Matthew
of course,
or Mark or John.
Of course.
And just imagine having a relationship or a narrative of the Messiah that you knew no one else had. Yeah, that intimacy.
And the fact that this is excluded from most Bibles because the idea that a woman knew Jesus more than anyone else knew him. And that's
part of the whole, that's like at the end of the book of Mary Magdalene, it talks about like Peter being like, he never told me that, so you're fucking with us. And then everyone's like, dude, what the fuck?
And also, like, I know that probably the only men who listen to our podcast, especially to this point, are faggots. But even them, like, the way that men are unable and, like, just entirely incapable or unwilling to open themselves up and explore their own emotions or whatever with other men, but they are able to with other women because this, like, I don't know, mommy projection or like whatever it is, or because they're just brushing up against the divine feminine that we get to experience with each other all the time, is like, it is such a privilege. Because to be around, like, like the woman in a man's life, and then to be around that man with the other men in his life
is
and
insane.
see, like, oh, y'all do not know him at all. At all. Like, I know the most, like, the deepest and the most intimate sides of him that, like,
he would never show you.
He would never show you. And it's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Like, it's honestly an alienating experience because especially as a woman, I assume as Mary Magdalene was amongst men, it's like, I don't know how to say this except that, like, he showed me parts of himself that he would have never felt comfortable showing you.
And like the whole, as I'll talk about this like a little bit more in other episodes, I'm sure, but like the whole point of the book of Mary Magdalene is you gotta have to stop thinking about yourself as the most important thing.
You do.
Like the entire point of our like physical existence is to stop thinking like that.
Yes.
And like the fact that what you're doing is perpetuating more bad is a sign that you need to stop doing that.
With bitch, Buddhism, it's like the root of all suffering is desire, and like the sense of self is an illusion. Like Buddhism kind of responds to Lacanian psychoanalysis and says like that identification of the self in the mirror stage or whatever. Yes,
to your own detriment.
To your own detriment. Like the Ouroboros, like as we were talking about earlier, is the truth. Like all is one and one is all. And we develop this sense of separation and thus of self because of the phenomenon of sensory perception. And that is so fucking cosmologically small. Ooh, I have senses.
And like
you are an ultra complex chemical in a chemical world, and that's glorious.
And the idea that like the absence of self is somehow the end of you is so ego.
It's so ego. Bitch, allow your ego death. Allow your ego to die. And know that for yourself to extend beyond the borders of you is eternity, not death.
If you really want best for yourself, eat the fucking tail of that snake.
Eat the fucking tail of that snake, bitch.
That's gay.
But you know what? It's okay because God is gay all the time.
And all the time, God is gay.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all so much for listening to today's service. And as always, thank you to our music minister, Brother Sam, for creating that beautiful piece of music that is our intro and outro.
And if you are a visitor with us today, if you don't mind hitting that subscribe button and rating us 5 stars wherever you're listening. And if you love the show next week when you come back, why don't you bring a friend?
And remember, God is gay all the time.
And all the time, God is gay.